All right, Endless Hustlers, we got another good one for you. Emmy nominated. I love saying that right off the top. Emmy nominated, Queer Eye star, and of course, one of the most famous design experts in America now, Bobby Berk. And of course, he's got like the sickest background behind him. Although you told me that's green screen?
Green screen. I mean, I did design the space. This is the loft from Queer Eye in Kansas City. But yeah, behind me is actually big built-in bookcases in my office that have pictures of all my family and like my nieces and nephews. And I got tired of being asked about all the book titles behind me. What I finally decided to do with green screen is when I was on Hillary Clinton's podcast. And as I'm talking to her, I look up and right behind me is Bill's book. And literally sticking out of the top of my head is Rodham, her book. And I'm like, God, I hope she doesn't think I just planted those there to look like a fan. So after that, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to put a green screen up.
By the way, that was the greatest humble brag of all time. Yeah, I was on Hillary Rodham's podcast, and that's such a great move.
What can I say? It's been a pretty cool few years.
Isn't it amazing the shit that happens when you end up being part of one of the most revolutionary phenomenons of television of the last probably decade?
It is. It's been crazy. I mean, this Emmy season is just even crazier. The fact that we're on, I guess this Emmy season would have been for season 5, but the fact that we're on our 5th season and still getting nominated for Emmys just blows me away. It's not.
Well, let's actually start there, because obviously at the top I said Emmy nomination. That must never get old. So I'm always curious, where are you when you find out? What's your reaction?
You know what does get old, honestly, is just hearing say Emmy nominated instead of Emmy winner. Because the funny thing is, we've won, the show has won tons of Emmys. Like, I don't even know how many, but me and the boys, everyone always thinks when the show wins best show, we walk home with Emmys, but we don't. We get to help the producers carry their Emmys home, but we don't. So hopefully this year, we've been nominated for Best Host again. Hopefully this year, RuPaul will actually fucking share and let us win.
I want to take you back to the beginning. How does a kid from the Midwest end up in LA, end up building what is now this mini empire you're building, and then you end up on Queer Eye? And I can only imagine, and we'll talk about it, the explosion that causes for you, both personally and professionally. But from where you start, how do you end up where you're at?
Oh God, I don't even know. I mean, how long do we have? Where do you want me to start? Like I said, I grew up in the Midwest, in the middle of nowhere, in a little bitty town, like 600 people. We didn't even live in town. We lived out in the country, out on Route 66, next to the Conoco pumping facility. And I always felt like I didn't belong there. I always felt like there was something about me. I mean, other than the fact that I was gay, I didn't realize that was one of the big things that was so different about me back then. But I remember farmers, even when I was little, in like the local coffee shop being like, boy, you don't belong here, do you? You belong in New York City or something. And I'd be like, yeah, I don't even really know what New York City is. But yeah, that sounds right. So I, at 15, left home. It was a combination of things, knowing I was gay, needing to come out, knowing that coming out was not an option in my home or my hometown. So just deciding to leave and try to make it on my own. So lived in my car, lived on the streets, couch surfed for a while, and ended up as a telemarketer selling long distance. I worked at gas stations, the Gap, the Body Shop, Express, the Bombay Company, Applebee's, TGI Fridays, Ruby Tuesdays, you name it, I worked there. And finally at like 17 or 18, I decided, hey, I'm not doing anything with my life here in Missouri. I didn't have an education. I had to drop out of school because I couldn't afford to eat and go to school. So I decided to move to Denver. And Denver, the reason being that was the one place in the world I knew one other person. I had met him on ICQ. He had helped me come out. He was a good friend of mine. He helped me find a place to stay out there. I ended up getting transferred with one of the jobs I was working at the Body Shop. I became the assistant manager of the Body Shop at Concourse B at Denver International Airport, making $24,000 a year. And I was like, oh my God, I am rich. I've never seen this much money in my life. And then I get to Denver and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so poor. $24,000 a year is nothing in Denver. What was I thinking? I remember the day I moved to Denver, coming in the U-Haul, driving over the valley and seeing Denver spread across the valley and the mountains, and pulling over and like almost having a meltdown and crying, going, oh my God, I've made the biggest mistake. The city is so massive. It's going to eat me alive. I'm never going to make it here. And then fast forward like 3 years later, it was like, oh my God, this city is so small. You've got to get me out of here. I've got to go to New York City. Denver is amazing. Totally a place I would live again. And even now it's even better than it used to be back in the early 2000s. But then I ended up going to New York. I went out there to visit a friend. I fell in love with somebody. I decided to move out there for them. Luckily, we actually broke up before I even moved there, but I had fallen in love with the city at the same time. So I moved out there with like $100 and a suitcase, and told myself I'd just get a job waiting tables, and I didn't really care. You know, I just wanted to be in the city. But in New York, you need New York City experience to get a job waiting tables, which I was not prepared for. And so it took me 3 months to get a job, but finally I got a job managing the Restoration Hardware. I was the design manager in charge of all the displays and everything at the Restoration Hardware in Manhattan. Excuse me 1 second. Let me take that squeaky toy away from my dog.
I love it.
Come here. You need to kind of do the squeaky one. She's like, but I love the squeaky one.
Oh my God. That's so awesome.
So happy. And so first job, New York, Restoration Hardware. Funny thing is, I mean, I know the story has been told, but I actually got fired from Restoration Hardware the day Tom Felicia from the original Queer Eye was filming in the store. So I thought I was devastated. It's over some stupid technicality. And little did I know it was one of the best things that happened to me. You know, later on, that manager that fired me, when she found out I got cast on the show, messaged me and she's like, aren't you glad I fired you? And I'm like, absolutely.
And then she's like, can I have some of the residuals?
Yeah. Can I have some of the residuals? Don't exist anymore. So after Restoration Hardware, I went to Bed Bath & Beyond, which was a horrible job. And then I started working for an Italian linen company, which then I started working for Portico, which was a high-end furniture company in New York and Chicago and San Francisco. And I worked my way up in Portico from store manager to buyer to creative director. I built their e-commerce division, but then the company all of a sudden went bankrupt and closed. So I was like, well, crap, what am I going to do? So I went online really quick and I registered BobbyBerkHome.com, and I cloned the database I had built their e-commerce site on, and I launched it on that. I'm like, well, maybe I'll sell a sofa or two while I look for another job. But I ended up selling more than a sofa or two. The website actually started doing really well. I was probably one of the first online furniture stores out there. I know that sounds crazy because I look so young, but it's true. There was no Wayfarers, you know, Amazon was still pretty much just selling books. It was me and I think Design Public who was still around. We were like the first two. My biggest hurdle was getting companies to sell to me, because it just, selling furniture online was just crazy to them. No one's going to buy furniture online. This is going to piss off our other stores too much. So I ended up opening up a store in Soho. And a little rewind, I told you I'd worked for an Italian linen company. They had brought me on to expand their brand in the US. And everything I tried to do, they fought me on. They thought they knew best. They thought Americans would deal with having no flat sheets. I'm like, no, you know, flat sheet, fitted sheet, pillowcase. Anyways, they fired me telling me I'd never amount to anything and that I was an idiot. So my website started doing well. I get a call from the Italians one day being like, hey, we hear you have a store, we're a company. And, you know, basically they called me to say, hey, will you buy us out because we're about to go under and we suck. So I ended up taking a really stupid business deal from them on paper, even though I knew that if I could pull it off, it would be the best decision I'd ever made. And it was. They wanted me to pay them an amount of cash. It was a small amount. It was only $50,000. But they also wanted me to take on all the debt. I think about $600,000. And at the time, and I mean, in general, $600,000 is a lot of money, yeah, especially for some 24, 25-year-old kid who, wasn't making that much money. And so all of my friends all of my friends, not even my friends that were just in finance, but especially them, they were like, no, this is so stupid. Don't do it. But I thought to myself, I'm like, if I can pull this off, I can skip the decades of work that brands have to do to get to Soho. Once you're in Soho, New York, you are legit. You are a brand. All these iconic brands worked decades to build themselves up that big. And I'm like, if I can pull this off, I'm going to skip all those years of work and I'm going to be legit. So I, took out a credit card loan to get the cash to pay them the 50 grand. And then I took on their debt and I turned that store into an Italian sample sale linen location. I called all the factories that they owed money to. And I'm like, hey, give us one last chance. I'm going to pay you back. Please send me product. So these factories sent me product, and I had a guy standing on the corner of Spring and Broadway with a big sign saying sample sale, up to 90% off. And it did really well. And within, I want to say like 6 months, I had paid off that debt. And I should have just kept that damn store as a sample sale location because it was a cash cow, but that wasn't the plan. The plan was to build a brand via retail. And I never wanted to be in retail with my company. I had worked retail for years. It was, especially in New York, it is just soul crushing. Customers can be so freaking awful. And I had put in, at that point, almost a decade of working in retail stores. So I was over it. But again, I knew if I can build this brand, if I can make it look even larger than it is, people are going to take notice. They're going to want to start maybe licensing my brand. Maybe this could turn into something with TV in which I can then expand the brand even bigger. And that slowly started to work. The Soho store did really well. So I opened up one in Miami, and then I opened one up in Atlanta and then LA. And brands started coming to me being like, hey, we want to license your name. We want to license your design. So I started selling my own products in my own stores, then in other retailers, wallpaper, pillows, rugs, furniture. And as the brand got bigger, I had a couple setbacks. I had a CFO who embezzled a bunch of money from me. And, it's running your own business is hard, especially when you're a small business. I had 4 stores, so I technically needed more corporate infrastructure other than myself. But with 4 stores in higher end areas, I didn't really have the cash flow to have that corporate infrastructure. So when there was a manager who didn't show up for work in Miami, who was on a plane to Miami, maybe. Right. And in 2014, which is kind of just when shit hit the fan, I was like, I'm done with this. I was in Miami at that store. I had been down there almost 80% of the year because I couldn't find a good manager. And the owner of the store next to mine in LA called me and he's like, hey man, he's like the stoner guy. He's like, I think your manager's dead, man. And I'm like, what do you mean she's dead? He's like, yeah, a customer came in and said they like found her like laying on the floor in the stock room. And I go, well, did you check on her? He's like, no, man, that shit scares me. And I'm like, well, can you go poke her or something or call 911? Don't just leave her back there. Long story short, she's passed out drunk. She had been through a bad breakup, and this manager that I finally thought I had found like the perfect manager, because I had been through so many actors in LA who would get a gig or an audition and just never show up for work. I finally found this awesome manager, and she passes out drunk. Later on, an employee that had just started 2 days before that told me the day before she had passed out drunk on a sofa in the front of the store with a lit cigarette in her hand. And he had to go put it out for her. And I'm like, why didn't you say anything? And he's like, this is my first day. I just thought that's how shit was around here. And I'm like, my God. So that was kind of the day that I'm like, you know what? I'm done with retail. I started closing stores and just focusing on my license and design business. And right around the same time, Builder Magazine called. And they're like, hey, we hired Ketchum PR to tell us who the most well-known millennial interior designer was. And they said it was you. And in my mind, I'm like, that was nice of them to say, considering I'm not a designer. Like, I'm a retailer, I'm a entrepreneur, I'm a curator, but I'm not a designer. They're like, we are building 2 show homes for the International Builders Show in Las Vegas, and we want you to design them. And I was like, sure. even though in my mind, I'm like, I have no idea how to design a house. You know, I help customers pick out furniture. I knew how to put together pretty things, but I didn't know the technicalities of designing a home. And this wasn't just picking up pretty furniture. This was electrical plans, construction documents, engineering, all of which I didn't know how to do. But of course I was like, absolutely, I can do that. Yes, me and my whole team. And at that point, there was no whole team. I had started closing stores. My husband and I had decided to move to LA to just focus on my licensing business. But I'm like, yes, I'll do it. And of course, as soon as I hung up the phone, I started Googling and getting on YouTube and figuring out how to do it. And kind of the moral of that story is sometimes even if you don't know how to do something, figure it out. Don't pass up an opportunity just because it's something you don't know how to do. Figure it out. Teach yourself how to do it, because so if you fail, you fail. But if you succeed, you can change your entire life, which was the case with this. I took a chance. I took a chance taking on that company's debt, which could have destroyed me. It could have put me in bankruptcy, but I took a chance and I succeeded with it, and it changed my life. And taking a chance saying that, yes, I can design these homes. Yes, I can do all this when I couldn't, but figuring out how to do it, it changed my life. So I designed these homes. My husband and I moved to LA. We installed the homes, and they turned into a big success. And the builder that built them ended up hiring me and my new firm that I just created to start doing development for them and designing their model homes and their developments and their clubhouses and their community centers. And that part of my business exploded. And it was great because we went into this industry of home builders, of what you might call a track home, little tiki-taki boxes on the hillside where they all look the same. And this particular builder, I called them the land of the Tuscan faux, because every house they built was an ugly ass Tuscan faux. And we went in, and since I wasn't a designer before, I hadn't been in that building industry, we were able to work with them and completely transform their business, because I brought in a completely different point of view that had never been in the building industry before, because I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. I'm like, well, why can't we do that? And they're like, oh, well, because this is the way we've always done it. And I'm like, that's not an answer. I'm like, give me a logical reason of why we can't vault this ceiling and actually make this a cool house. And then I'll let it go. And in the end, they're like, oh, actually, we can vault that ceiling and it will actually save us money. So yeah, let's do it. So all these things of, I'm going off on a tangent on building because it's still a big passion of mine. But, in the building industry, they're always like, you don't want to show too many upgrades in a home, because, customers and buyers are going to be upset when they get in there and realize that everything they love about the home is an upgrade. They're like, you've got to show a lot of standards. But I'm like, no, you show the upgrades, you show these people what they really want, and they're going to figure out a way to get it. And their upgrades went up 40% that year. So just going in, and even if you don't know how to do something, I think this is the point I'm trying to drive home. Figure it out.
You go forward.
Just do it. The worst thing that can happen is that you fail. So what? As Joy Behar would say, so what? Who cares? Pick yourself back up and try something else. Don't let anybody tell you, like for me, I didn't have the education. So people would say, oh, you can't run a business. Oh, you can't own a design firm. You don't have the education. And I'm like, I got Google. I have YouTube. That's really all you need these days.
You also have BobbyBerk.com right now, which is this comprehensive lifestyle site. So with the success of Queer Eye, and now that you're essentially a mainstream celebrity, being able to have everything at BobbyBerk.com, how does all of that outside fame impact that?
BobbyBerk.com, we launched, I don't know, a year and a half ago at this point. And I was constantly getting DMs of people asking about design stuff and lifestyle stuff and everything that we really talked about on the show. So I wanted to put together a destination, and some people might call it a blog, but I prefer to call it a lifestyle site, an editorial site. And we put together all the things that you would kind of learn on Queer Eye. It's not just about design, but it's about food and fashion and travel and social issues. We dive into all kinds of things, and it's really cool for me to be able to have a site in which it's not just a site about selling something, although we do carry my furniture on there. We just launched that a month ago because originally we didn't want to sell anything on there, but our customers kept getting annoyed that they had to try to find a retailer, and they're like, why can't I just buy it from you? And I'm like, okay, fine. But the majority of our site, besides a small little part of e-commerce, is educational, and not just for design, but for your entire life, because it's your life, and we want to help you design it well.
So when Queer Eye happens, obviously it becomes one of the great breakout television successes of a generation at this point. Fame is a tricky thing, and no one is ever ready. How were you able to essentially process what was happening around you as that's all exploding?
For me, I never really, I never had a goal of being famous. There are days sometimes where I'm like, I really should have thought this through a little harder. But it happened. I think it's one of the differences between me and some of my castmates, and I'm not saying that either of our philosophies were better than the other ones. But for example, like Tan and I, we weren't looking to be on TV. We weren't looking to be famous. We both had businesses, and we're like, oh, this could benefit our business. Okay, we'll give it a try. And, we got really lucky. The show that happened to come knocking turned into a hit. But I think how I've made it all work is I try to stay grounded. My husband and I have been together for 18 years. All of my best friends have been with me 15, 20, 25 years. I surround myself with the people that have always been around me, and I think it keeps me grounded. And, anytime I get a little too big for my britches, they're the first ones to call me out. And that's what I need, and yeah, keeping myself grounded is keeping the people around me that keep me grounded. Yeah.
So I live in New York now. I'm in the West Village, but originally I'm from Philadelphia. And when you guys were filming in Philly doesn't really have celebrities like the weathermen and the sportscasters. Those are the movie stars of Philadelphia and the athletes.
Don't forget Gritty.
And Gritty. Yeah, Gritty's the Brad Pitt of Philadelphia. But when you guys were there, everyone on Instagram, my Instagram was filled with Queer Eye sightings. What was that experience like for you being in Philly?
It's crazy, honestly, a lot of us, we didn't really go out much because it did get to be crazy. We had to start exiting only out of the parking garage of our building, and we can't really go and walk around. On one hand, it's nice, all of our fans are amazing. Our show doesn't really attract assholes. If you're an asshole, you probably don't like our show, and you probably have no idea who we are. And that is great.
Or you convert assholes to non-assholes because you're like, we're assholes.
Yeah.
We're assholes because we're not like them.
So being accosted by fans all the time in Philly, and on one hand, it was really great because all of our fans are all very nice, sweet, loving people who our show has touched in many different wonderful ways. On another hand, though, it can be a lot sometimes. When you're just wanting to run over to 7-Eleven to get something, but it takes an hour because every 5 steps you're running into somebody who wants to share a story about the show. So yeah, it's definitely a very different life now. One of the really positive things about the pandemic was masks. It was kind of nice. Kind of nice to be able to go to the grocery store again, but no. Anyways.
You get so much, I'm imagining, incredible feedback. Your fan base is so connected and engaged with you guys. What's been maybe 1 or 2 moments for you that really stick out where you're like, holy shit, we made such a difference in somebody's life, whether it's on the show or off the show?
I think one of the DMs that really sticks out in my mind, if you've seen the show, I have a love-hate relationship with religion, and it's definitely more on the hate side. And I got a DM from a pastor who said, I grew up in the church. My dad was a pastor. We taught people to hate gays because, gays were an abomination. They were pedophiles. They were going to hell. And I taught the exact same rhetoric in my church as well. But after seeing your show, I came to the realization that being gay is not a choice. All this time, I thought people were making this choice to go against God. And I realized it's not a choice. And hearing that you begged and pleaded and prayed every single day for God not to make you gay, and yet you still are, has completely changed my entire point of view on homosexuality. And I will never teach that hate in my church again. So if the only thing that came out of all the craziness of the last few years, the only thing that happened was that, I would die happy.
How does this type of success, television success, change your brand off of screen? How does it elevate it with your design business, with the website? What happens?
My design business, honestly, actually hurt for a while. You would think that it would have made it explode, but it hurt it quite a bit for a while. Because as I mentioned before, most of our business was with builders. That was our bread and butter. That was the business that we preferred. Working with individual clients, it's hard because you're not just a designer, you're a marriage counselor. It's a very personal experience because it's their home. So, there's a lot of emotion in it. So we really prefer to work with builders because there's zero emotion in it. And we go in, we do our job and we do it well, and then we go home. We don't get those texts at 1 o'clock in the morning about some vase that they fell in love with on Amazon. So in the very beginning, all of the builders were just like, oh, well, he's famous now. He doesn't want to do this anymore. And instantly, all new projects just completely dried up. And, I have a large team. And so I am still paying all these salaries to people and no new business is coming in. And so I finally had to pick up the phone and be like, "God, what's going on? Why aren't we working with you? What happened?" And they're like, "Oh, we didn't think you want to do this anymore." And I'm like, "No, I still really enjoy this. And I have a whole team that works on this. Please send me business again." So that picked back up again. But then it's the personal projects, and individual clients, those are very tricky when you're famous. Because a lot of times they're just contacting you because they're big fans. So it created a lot of extra work of sifting through legitimate inquiries versus people who are just wanting to talk to me or just trying to get attention. It flooded my team's inboxes, and it made it kind of hard to actually find the real work. And even the ones that are the real work, it's still a level of fandom. So it's been tricky. It's been tricky with my design business.
By the way, that's a complete opposite response I expected. I expected it to be like, we went 10x after Queer Eye.
No, there are other aspects of my business that I did. I own a media and branding company as well. And we work with really large brands like Target and Capital One and Lowe's, and we create content for them, whether it be with me in it or just great design content that we create for them. So that portion of my business, 100 times fold. That exploded because it's much easier to sift through the Joe Schmo messaging wanting me to create some video content for them versus, Lowe's and Target and Capital One and PayPal. When those companies come knocking, it's easy to do that. So yes, there are parts of my business that have greatly succeeded more so because of the fame and of Queer Eye. And then there's parts of them that like my design business still isn't where it was. Our builders, I think some of them are now a bit intimidated, and not in a bad way, just again, thinking that, oh, he says he still wants to do this, but he doesn't. And, I used to be very, very hands-on in my design business. Every single builder meeting I was on a plane at, and unfortunately I'm not now. I don't have the time. I'm either filming Queer or other shows almost 360 days a year now. So yeah, some parts of my business it's hurt, some parts it's helped.
I want to talk to you about the craft of designing, because ultimately it's a craft. It's your art. When we see it on the show, we're going to see the produced version of it. But in real life, when you walk into a space, is it muscle memory at this point? What are the things you look at? What are the things you look for? How does the creative process work for you in terms of the actual design, the design part of it?
Is this just on Queer Eye or in general?
In general.
It depends. Honestly, my first thought is always function and flow. And that's from a remodel to an existing or a new build. One of the things that kind of set us apart in the building industry was we would get in at the ground floor of designing a home where most of the time the builders would work with an architecture firm. They design the home, they design the layout, they would design the exterior, and then they'd bring a designer on board and be like, hey, okay, all right, furnish it, make it pretty inside. Where we would be like, we really want to be in on the ground floor. We want to work with the architects, because so many architects, their focus would be making the outside look really cool, and then the inside would suck. You know, I'm like, all right, we've got 6 bedrooms in this home, but we've got this tiny living area. Like, where are all the people that will potentially be sleeping in this home eat? Because there's not a large enough dining room for all these people to eat at, you know, or yeah, these really cool on the outside, but you created 0 wall space in this living room. So where is anyone going to put a TV? Where is any art going to go? So we would first work with them on function and how are people actually going to live in this space. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about making it pretty, it's about making a space function. And to me, function always should come at the forefront. It should always be the most important thing in a space. And then once you figured out function, then you worry about making it pretty. But the functionality of a space is what will make you love or hate that space. It could be such a pretty space, but every day when you wake up, you're annoyed because it doesn't function well. It doesn't matter how pretty it is. You know, you have that beautiful $40,000 coffee table, but if it's a little bit too large and where it's at and you stub your toe on it every day, you're going to hate it. You know, not that I would ever put a $40,000 coffee table into a house. I think that's just, no offense to the designers that design like that. That's not me. I'd rather spend money better ways. But yeah, so function is the first thing I think about when I walk into a space or look at plans.
Speaking of designing, you obviously have your ART collection. How involved are you with that? What's the process? Because every celebrity's doing something, whether it's liquor, furniture, Kim Kardashian doing skins.
I have a tequila coming out soon as well. It's really great. I went down and I did all these tastings and I found the best one. No, I'm kidding. Sorry, what was the question?
ART.
Yes.
What's the process of putting together a furniture collection?
So in the past, I've been much, much more hands-on with designing each individual piece than I am now, to be honest. There are some pieces I design from the ground up. And those are kind of the core pieces. And then there'll be other pieces that my team designs. And then there's other pieces that the team at ART is like, hey, because they're the furniture company, they're the ones that deal with the retailers. They're like, hey, we're missing this type of piece that we think is going to sell well. We're missing this, this is going to make a cohesive collection. So they'll throw some things in the hat and be like, what do you think of this? And I'm like, yeah, I like this, but let's do this material or this fabric, this marble. So every single piece I have touched in some way. Some from the ground up, some from just, okay, I really like this shape, but let me change the material or let me change the color. Okay.
So one of the main reasons I started this show, Bobby, was to talk to successful people in all genres about the principles and the mentality that help make them successful. So my question to you is, how do you continue to elevate in your life and raise your principles and excellence?
For me, elevate. I think I like to elevate my life and the people around me with kindness and the way I treat people. I've definitely found that in this industry that there are a lot of people out there that are portrayed as nice people that are just pieces of and they are not the nice people. And the way I elevate myself in my life is I always, always, always react with kindness, no matter if it's a work situation, no matter if it's me running through an airport and missing my flight because I've run into so many lovely fans who want to stop and talk to me. It's kindness, because that's the way I think the world should operate. And it's the way you treat people. And that doesn't just start with the fame of the way you treat fans and the way you give back to them, but also, my team. My team is the most important thing in the world. I couldn't do what I do without my team, and just making sure that they are able to live the life that they deserve is important as well. So kindness, the way you treat people, the Bible verse, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Matthew, what was that? 4:17, maybe? Don't quote me on that. It's been a long time since I was state champ of Bible quiz. But yeah, it's kindness and the way you treat people. I think if we worried more about the way we treated others, the whole world would elevate.
My final question is, you've probably had so many batshit amazing moments that you've experienced over the last few years that are probably so mind-blowing that most people can never comprehend. What's the one that you kind of sit back and think, I can't believe this happened to me?
I don't even know if I can choose one.
You can choose a couple. I'll open it up.
Last year, Elton John asking us to host his Oscar party because, he'd be at the Oscars and couldn't do it himself. I think a very vivid moment. And I think the moment that really was that time that I realized that, whoa, this show is a big fucking deal. We were in the UK on a press tour, and BBC was putting on BBC biggest weekend. It's basically this big music festival like a Coachella. And they bring us out to Wales. We're back in the VIP tents with all the talent there with, Ed Sheeran and Liam Payne and, Taylor Swift was there. And this was before we knew Taylor and was in her music video. And, I'm just sitting there, I'm like, and we're in this big tent so we could hear how the crowd reacted to every single artist that would go out on stage, and the crowd would yell and scream. And then finally it was time for us to go up on stage because they wanted us to go out on stage and say hi to everybody and introduce years and years before they went on. And we walk up on stage and the crowd just went insane. And they yelled louder for us than the biggest stars on the planet. And I was just overwhelmed with emotion, and I held it together on stage, and I did my thing, and I was a professional. And the moment I turned my back to walk off stage, I just lost it. It was one of the most emotionally overwhelming things I've ever experienced in my life. And I walked off stage and I went down to like the mosh pit area or whatever they call it right in front of the stage to listen to Ali and Years play. And I just stood there and I bawled, and so many fans were looking at me like, oh my God, is he okay? But just like letting myself be covered in that moment is something I will never forget.
Dude, this was awesome. I love your show. I'm a huge fan. My producer, Rachel, who's on with us, we're all fans, and I'm sure you hear that a million times, but you're one of the shows in a world of TV where so much of it can be shitty. You guys are doing some really, really great stuff and making a difference. And I think that's freaking awesome. So brand new season of Queer Eye on the way. Emmy nomination, BobbyBerk.com, ART, all the plugs, man. Congratulations on everything. You're awesome.
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me. Hopefully meet you soon sometime.
Same here, man. Thanks so much for joining, Bobby.
Bye.